Welcome back, deep divers. Today, we're taking a look at something uh, pretty unsettling.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's the disappearance of this family from Arizona,
Okay.
and it all seems to be tied into these, like, doomsday prophecies.
Wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
and there's even talk about the teenage son being some kind of, like, chosen one.
Hmm. Sounds like something out of a movie.
Right. It's giving, like, thriller vibes. But for the father of this 16-year-old, uh, Blay is his name, this is very, very real.
I bet.
Can you imagine, like, the fear, like, not knowing where your kid is?
Oh, it would be just awful.
Yeah. And then on top of that, like, what if they've been, like, pulled into these beliefs that they don't even, like, believe in themselves?
That's scary. Yeah.
It's a lot. So we're gonna unpack it all.
Yeah, let's do it. It's definitely a case that gives you chills just thinking about it. You have this family, seemingly ordinary, just vanishes.
Right.
Blay, his mom Spring, his sister Abby, and then their uncle Brooke. But under the surface, there's this whole other layer of like end of the world anxieties.
Yeah. It's wild. So to understand how they just disappeared, I
Yeah.
have to kind of go back. Back in 2015, Blaze's mom, Spring, she was attending the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
Okay.
But even though the church, they have their teachings and all Spring's fascination with these doomsday prophecies, it just sort of, it went beyond that. It even started causing problems in her marriage.
Yeah, that's a really important point. Her beliefs, they didn't just align with the mainstream LDS teachings. It went further, like way further.
Yeah.
And it makes you think about how these kind of extreme ideas, how accessible they are,
Oh, for sure.
especially online. It's like echo chambers everywhere.
And it was like, she wasn't just like prepping for a storm or something.
Right.
It was full-blown apocalypse prepping, like stockpiling survival gear and tons of food in Arizona.
Yeah, that's a bit much.
Yeah, but then her daughter Abby and brother Brooke, they got involved too.
So then you have this whole family unit
Right.
that's convinced the world's ending.
Yeah.
And they're isolated, just feeding off each other's fears. It's almost like cult-like behavior, and it seems like Blay, this teenager, he was stuck right in the middle of it all.
Yeah. Poor Blay.
Mm-hmm.
Can you imagine being a teenager and your mom is like hoarding freeze-dried food because she thinks the world is about to end?
No, I mean, teenagers have it hard enough as it is.
Yeah, exactly. He's just a normal kid, liked football, hanging out with his friends. He wasn't into the whole, prepping for doomsday thing.
So that makes it makes his disappearance even more troubling.
Right.
He was told it was a birthday surprise, not a one-way ticket to who knows where.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder if he went willingly or if there was some pressure, some coercion involved.
So here's what we know so far. They flew to Boise, Idaho, rented one of those rugged SUVs, the kind you'd take off-roading, and then, poof, gone.
Just vanished.
And get this. Before they disappeared, Blaze's uncle, Brooke, wrote these farewell letters to his kids.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he also withdrew a ton of cash. And he even started, like, giving away his stuff.
That's not a good sign.
No. It feels very premeditated, like he knew they weren't coming back. And when you consider that Blade probably didn't want any part of this, it raises all these red flags.
It really does. It's very concerning.
And meanwhile, Blaze's dad, Ben, is left in this horrible limbo. He's working with the police, obviously.
Of course.
But he's also doing his own investigating. Like, he's convinced that Blay is in danger.
Can you blame him? I mean, it's his son.
No, not at all.
Right.
And he's even said that he's worried that Blay might have been restrained or even sedated.
Oh my gosh, that's just awful. You can just hear the desperation in Ben's voice whenever he talks about it. To think that his family would go to these extremes and that his son might be trapped in this dangerous situation, it's just unimaginable.
And it's not like Spring and Abby were just casually interested in doomsday stuff. They were deep into it, spending hours online in these like fringe religious groups, reading all about these apocalyptic scenarios.
Yeah, it's really a double-edged sword, this technology.
Mm.
On one hand, it can be good for people who are feeling isolated. They find community online.
Yeah.
But it also creates these echo chambers where extreme beliefs just get amplified. And anyone who disagrees, they're just shut out.
Right. And it seems like this online world played a big role in convincing them to, well, disappear.
Absolutely. It fueled their convictions, their fears. It's really a cautionary tale about the power of these online echo chambers. But we also need to talk about Abby's husband, Braden.
Okay.
He was actually supportive of Abby's interest in preparedness at first,
Mm-hmm.
but as her beliefs got more and more extreme, he got worried.
Yeah, it's like that slippery slope. It starts out seeming harmless, prepping for emergencies, that makes sense?
Right.
But then it just escalates.
You can get out of hand quickly.
And then it becomes, is this rational or is this something more troubling?
And for Braden, the breaking point was when Abby suddenly said it's time to go and that they wouldn't be coming back.
Wow.
Can you imagine being in his shoes? Just total shock, confusion, disbelief.
Yeah, so much to unpack there.
It's like he was forced to confront the fact that the woman he loved had become consumed by these beliefs.
It's really a testament to Braden that he was able to step back and see the situation for what it was. He even tried to convince Abby to stay, but she was adamant. She even tried to get him to go with them, promising they'd be back in a few years.
Yeah.
But Braden, thankfully, held on to reality and refused to abandon his life.
It's incredible. He didn't give in to the pressure. He knew it was a bad idea.
So while all of this was happening, Ben, still desperately trying to find any information about Blay, made another disturbing discovery. His brother-in-law, Brooke, he hadn't just taken a bunch of cash. He'd also written what seemed to be a farewell letter to his kids.
That's chilling.
Yeah, and between that letter, the cash, and giving away his possessions, it really seems like he had planned this, like he knew he was cutting ties permanently.
It adds a whole new layer of concern.
Right. And it makes you think, what exactly did they believe was going to happen?
Right.
And what role did they think Blay, this so-called chosen one, would play in their doomsday scenario? It's unsettling.
It really is. What was their end game? What kind of future did they envision for themselves for Blay? It's a harsh reminder that even if we think these beliefs are irrational, they can drive people to do things that are incredibly dangerous.
It's that line between belief and action, and it can get blurry really fast, especially when those beliefs are fueled by fear and a distorted view of reality. It's a cautionary tale for sure.
It is. We need to be aware of the signs of these extremist ideologies and how much harm they can cause, not just to individuals, but to society as a whole. It's complex, but it's something we have to pay attention to.
Okay, so we know they landed in Boise, but their journey didn't end there. Surveillance footage shows them leaving the airport in a white Lexus SUV. It was one of those ones built for off-roading, you know.
So they definitely weren't planning to stay in a city.
Right. It seems clear they were heading somewhere remote, somewhere hard to find, like they were trying to get lost in the wilderness. And while Ben was trying to reach them, their phones went straight to voicemail.
So they cut off all communication.
Yeah. Seems very deliberate.
Like they wanted to disappear without a trace.
Yeah.
It's a classic move for these types of groups. They create this sense of us versus them, reinforcing their beliefs, making it harder for anyone on the outside to challenge them.
They were building their own world, a world where only their beliefs mattered. And in that world, the idea of Blay being the chosen one becomes even more worrying.
It's so troubling because this label, this belief, it was forced on him.
Right.
Blay wasn't interested in prophecies or this apocalyptic vision. He was just a teenager. They put him in a role he never asked for and probably didn't even understand.
Exactly. And I think they might have resorted to restraining him or sedating him to make him go along with them. It's truly disturbing. They were willing to completely disregard his well-being, all because of their belief in their interpretation of some prophecy.
It raises so many questions about ethics, about the law. How far can individuals go in imposing their beliefs on others, especially children? Blay's case really shows what can happen when ideologies become so rigid, so absolute, that they just disregard basic human rights.
It's a reminder that freedom of belief is one thing, but it doesn't give anyone the right to harm others or control them. Blay's situation really shows what can happen when that line is crossed.
It's a complex issue, that's for sure. It's a story about a family driven to extremes and a teenage boy caught in the middle. It's a reminder that belief can be powerful, but it can also be dangerous when it's not tempered with compassion and critical thinking. But there's another important aspect of this story, and that's the legal side of things. Blay was a minor, and he was taken from his father without consent.
You're right. This is where custody and parental rights come in. A judge in Arizona actually granted Blay's father, Ben, temporary sole custody.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and they issued an emergency order demanding that Blay be returned immediately.
So legally, Spring and Brooke had to bring Blay back to his father.
Right, and they made the choice to flee anyway. That's custodial interference, which is a serious offense.
Absolutely. It's not just about parental rights. It's about protecting the child. The courts knew that Blay was at risk and took action to protect him.
And as the investigation progressed, the Gilbert Police Department in Arizona got involved. They started treating this as an alleged custodial interference case.
So it became a potential criminal investigation.
Exactly, which
Oh.
just adds another layer of pressure to everything.
And you can imagine how difficult this was for Ben.
Yeah,
He was already dealing with the emotional stress of his son disappearing, and now he had to navigate the legal system, work with the police, conduct his own investigation.
there's a lot to handle.
It's amazing he didn't fall apart. He's a testament to how strong a parent can be in the face of the unimaginable.
He was determined to do everything he could to find his son. He even started speaking publicly about the case, asking for any information that might help bring Blay home. He talked about Blay's personality, his love for football, how he wasn't into his family's beliefs.
He wanted to remind everyone that this wasn't just an abstract case.
Right.
It was about a real boy, a boy who was missing and potentially in danger. It was powerful, and it caught the attention of people across the country.
And it brought attention to the fact that this wasn't just a family drama. It was a sign of something much bigger, something that affects all of us.
Exactly. It raised awareness about extremist ideologies, the vulnerability of children.
It showed how important public awareness is in cases like this.
Ben's willingness to share his story, his vulnerability, his determination to find his son, it was inspiring, and it kept the case in the public eye.
And it reminds us that we can all play a part in protecting vulnerable people. Whether it's speaking out against harmful ideas, supporting law enforcement, or just sharing information, we can all make a difference.
It's about recognizing that these situations, they're not isolated. It's part of a bigger problem that we need to address. Blay's story is a wake-up call. We need to be more aware, more compassionate, and more proactive in protecting those who are most at risk. But this is just the beginning.
Right.
There's a lot more to uncover, more complexities to this case.
Join us in part 2 as we dig deeper into the investigation, the family's motives, and what might happen next in this unsettling story. And if you're finding this deep dive as fascinating as we are, hit that subscribe button to stay updated as we uncover more pieces of this puzzle.
It's just, as we keep looking into this case, it's hard not to think about how different Blay's life was from the world his family was obsessed with.
Yeah, total opposite, really.
Right. Like he's dealing with all the normal stuff teenagers go through.
School, football,
Mhm.
friends, yeah.
Exactly. But his family is completely consumed with these end times prophecies. It's almost like they were living in two totally separate realities.
It's a pretty jarring contrast for sure.
And it just makes you wonder, how does a kid deal with that?
Right. How do you even wrap your head around that as a teenager?
You're trying to figure out who you are, what you want to do in life,
Yeah.
and then your family's telling you that the world is about to end. It's got to be a heavy burden to carry.
Yeah. I mean, it's a lot for anyone, let alone a teenager. And it makes you wonder what the long-term effects are of growing up with those kinds of anxieties.
Absolutely. It's not just about the individuals involved. It affects the whole family, especially the kids, and the consequences can be serious, long-lasting. But let's focus on the family's journey for a moment. We know they went to Idaho, but we still don't know their final destination. What clues do we have about where they might have gone?
Well, they rented an SUV, one that was built for off-roading. That tells us they weren't planning to stick to the main roads.
Right. They weren't going to be sightseeing in Boise?
No, not exactly. So it seems like they were heading somewhere remote, maybe into the mountains, somewhere rugged.
I remember how focused Spring was on stockpiling supplies.
Yeah, like she was preparing for a real, off-the-grid, post-apocalyptic scenario.
Exactly. It paints a picture of someone who truly believed they needed to be self-sufficient. And that kind of self-sufficiency requires a very particular environment. They weren't planning on blending in with society.
So they wanted to get away from civilization, create their own little doomsday community.
Precisely. And that makes the search incredibly difficult.
Yeah, they've completely isolated themselves, making it hard for anyone to track them.
It's like trying to find a needle in a haystack, but the haystack is constantly moving.
Exactly. But there's another layer to this we haven't talked about much yet. The family's connection to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. They were members, but their beliefs seem to have gone way beyond mainstream LDS teachings.
Yeah, it's important to emphasize that. Their beliefs were much more extreme. They fixated on doomsday scenarios, on separating themselves from the world. It's a reminder that even within established religions, there can be groups that latch onto these fringe interpretations.
And to be fair to the LDS Church, they've made it clear that they don't support these kinds of apocalyptic beliefs.
Right, they've distanced themselves from those views.
But even so, Spring and her family were clearly influenced by their faith. They believed they were acting on some kind of divine inspiration.
It raises a lot of questions about how we interpret our faith, how we reconcile our personal beliefs with the official teachings of our religious institutions, and when do those beliefs cross the line and become harmful?
Tough questions for sure. There are no easy answers. But Blaze's story shows how religious beliefs, even when they're sincere, can sometimes have unintended, even tragic consequences.
It's a reminder that belief systems can be misused, distorted, sometimes with devastating results.
It's a delicate balance, respecting religious freedom while also making sure that people are safe. But let's shift back to the investigation. What steps were taken to find Blay and his family once they vanished?
Well, as we said before, the Gilbert Police Department in Arizona took the lead, treating it as a custodial interference case. They worked with other agencies in Idaho and other states, trying to piece together the family's movements. It was a big, coordinated effort.
And Ben, Blay's dad, he was really active in the investigation, wasn't he?
Absolutely. He didn't just wait around. He worked closely with the police, did his own searches, made public appeals.
He was determined to find his son, using every resource he could.
And imagine the challenges he faced, trying to find a family that had deliberately disappeared.
Dealing with multiple jurisdictions, not knowing if his son was safe, it's a lot.
It really is. But he never gave up hope, and his efforts were crucial in keeping the case in the public eye. And of course, there was a lot of media attention.
Oh yeah, the story went national.
News outlets everywhere picked it up. It had all the elements of a captivating story.
The mystery, the Doomsday angle, the missing teenager.
Exactly. And that media coverage was a double-edged sword.
In what way?
Well, on one hand, it raised awareness, potentially led to some tips.
Right.
But on the other hand, it put a lot of pressure on Ben and his family.
Yeah, I can imagine.
It brought them into the public spotlight, which can be tough when you're dealing with something so personal and painful.
It's a reminder that the media plays a complex role in these cases. They want to inform the public, but they also need to be sensitive to the people involved.
It's a balance, for sure. But in this case, the media attention helped keep the focus on finding Blay. But let's talk about something practical. The family's finances, they took a lot of cash, and they seemed to cut off their bank accounts. How are they surviving on the run?
That's a good question, and one that investigators have been trying to answer.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like they were mostly living off the cash they had.
Maybe doing odd jobs here and there, things that wouldn't be easily traced.
Right, under the radar. And don't forget about Spring's stockpile of supplies.
Oh, yeah, all that food and gear. They were probably using that, trying to stretch their money as far as possible.
So they were living off the grid using their survival skills and their stockpile to get by.
Exactly. But that kind of lifestyle is difficult to maintain long term.
Eventually, they'd need more supplies or some way to make money.
And that's where things could get interesting. Their need for resources might be what leads to their discovery.
It's a risky game, trying to stay hidden.
Every interaction they have with the outside world is a chance for someone to recognize them.
It's a race against time, trying to find them before they disappear completely. And at the center of it all is a father who just wants his son back. But we've only just begun to explore this case.
There's so much more to unravel, so many questions still unanswered.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into this case, it's time to look ahead. What are the possible outcomes?
Right, like will they find this family? Will Blay be reunited with his father?
Or will they stay missing, lost in this world they've created for themselves?
Each possibility comes with its own set of complexities.
Yeah.
And while we can't predict the future, thinking about these different outcomes can help us understand the dynamics of this case.
Right. So let's start with the outcome we all hope for.
Of course.
They find the family, Blay is safe, and he's reunited with his father.
The best case scenario.
But even then, the healing process, it's going to be a long road.
Oh, absolutely. Belay's been through a lot, taken from his life, forced into this world of his family's anxieties. He'll need time, support, probably professional help, just to process everything and start to rebuild his life.
And what about accountability? Will Spring and Brooke face legal consequences for what they did?
That's a tough one. Custodial interference is serious, and they knowingly ignored a court order.
Right. So could they be reunited with their families, or will this lead to estrangement?
It's really hard to say. It'll depend on a lot of factors, like how they're found, their mental state, if they're willing to reconcile. And of course, the legal system will have its say.
Yeah, so many legal and emotional considerations. It's really impossible to predict what will happen.
Right. But the impact, it's going to be long-lasting, that's for sure.
And then there's the possibility that they never find them, that they just stay missing, lost in the wilderness.
It's a possibility we have to consider.
And for Ben and his family, that means living with the uncertainty, the not knowing. It's heartbreaking, that constant wondering.
The unresolved grief, the unanswered questions, it can stay with you for years.
Even decades. It's a reminder that these cases don't just end when they're not in the news anymore. The pain lingers.
It's so important to remember the human impact of these stories, the real people who are suffering.
Right. It's not just a headline.
And that's why we need to keep talking about it, to raise awareness about the dangers of extremism and the impact it has on families.
Throughout this whole deep dive, I've been thinking, what can we learn from this? How can we prevent something like this from happening again?
That's the question, isn't it? I think a big part of it is critical thinking. Being willing to question our beliefs, to look at things from different perspectives, and being wary of ideologies that preach isolation and fear.
It's easy to get stuck in our own little bubbles, especially online. We only see information that agrees with us.
Exactly. So we need to develop a healthy skepticism, be careful about what we believe, and look for different viewpoints.
Challenge our own assumptions. Be open to being wrong.
And it's not just about personal responsibility. We need to create a culture where critical thinking is encouraged,
Where it's okay to question authority, to have respectful debates.
to challenge the status quo. We need to teach kids how to think for themselves, how to evaluate information, not just blindly follow what they're told.
And we have to be able to spot the warning signs of extremist ideologies, the red flags that tell us someone is getting sucked in.
Things like withdrawing from family and friends, becoming obsessed with apocalyptic ideas, blindly following a certain ideology, and distrusting mainstream sources of information.
And if we see those signs, we have to intervene, offer support, challenge those harmful beliefs, help them find a healthier perspective.
It's about recognizing that this is a shared responsibility. We all need to do our part to protect people and create a society that's resistant to extremism. But it's not about silencing opposing views.
Right. It's not about censorship.
It's about having open discussions, promoting critical thinking, and encouraging empathy and understanding.
So that brings us to empathy. How can we understand the people who hold these beliefs, even if we completely disagree with them?
It's easy to dismiss them as irrational or dangerous, but we have to remember that their beliefs often come from a place of fear, insecurity.
They're looking for certainty, meaning in a world that feels out of control.
Exactly. And while we can't condone harmful actions, we have to understand that their motivations are often rooted in deep conviction.
Even if that conviction is based on something that's not true.
Right. And if we can approach these situations with empathy, with a genuine desire to understand, we might be able to engage with them in a meaningful way.
Challenge their beliefs constructively, offer alternative perspective.
It's about building bridges, not walls. Recognizing that we're all human, even when we disagree, we need to be able to talk about these tough issues without resorting to demonization.
To have open, honest conversations, to challenge harmful ideologies without pushing people away.
Blaze's story has been quite a journey for us.
It really has.
It's shown us the power of belief, the vulnerability of children, and the impact these situations have on everyone involved.
It's a story that forces us to look at ourselves, at the world around us, and it leaves us with more questions than answers.
Where is Blaze? What's happened to his family? What can we learn from all of this, and how can we use those lessons to create a better world?
Those questions are going to stay with us long after this deep dive is over.
They will. But as we continue to grapple with these questions, I think it's important to remember that Blaze's story isn't just a warning. It's a call to action.
To be more aware of the things that shape our beliefs, more compassionate towards those who think differently, and more active in protecting people from harm.
It's a call to create a world where critical thinking and respectful dialogue are valued, where we recognize and resist extremism, a world where families can handle differences in beliefs without resorting to isolation and fear.
And in the end, Blaze's story reminds us that even in the face of tragedy and uncertainty, there's still hope. Hope for healing, for families to find their way back to each other, and for us to learn from these difficult experiences.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep thinking about these issues, share your thoughts, and stay informed about the search for Blaze and his family.
As we move forward, let's remember what we've learned and work towards a world where every child is safe, valued, and free to live authentically. A life without fear and coercion.
That's it for this episode of The Deep Dive. We'll be back next time to explore another captivating story. Until then, stay curious.